Alright, look, I got my hands up, but let me explain real quick. I understand that the title of the video says that there's a problem with video game remakes. I totally get it. But if you let me explain for the next who knows how many minutes, you'll understand why I titled it this way. First of all, remakes, and remakes. You can't get rid of them, but you know that at some point the video game industry will want to look at a game and say, why not bring this one back? To which results in good and perhaps bad experiences depending on certain aspects such as development time. Sometimes a game that gets remade turns out to be something that may work in its favor, introducing new players to what was regarded as an iconic title or franchise, and other times it results in being unnecessary, like The Last of Us Part 1. Yeah, I know, the fruit was hanging low on that one, but I needed to take the chance while it was there. Now, the term remake has been thrown into the fray in the gaming world here and there, but it's not as often explained very well when it comes down to actually understanding what makes a game a remake in the first place. Remakes are defined as the idea of remaking, of course, or reimagining what an original concept such as a video game would have looked like in the setting of the modern gaming world if it was to be developed at this time or at the time of when the developers of a game would want to bring it back. Now, not to be confused with re-releases or remasters, where they generally give an HD look to the original game while giving a fresh coat of paint and keeping the overall original formatting of it, remakes tend to be worked from the ground up and improve on what was established previously while making their own thing in the process, resulting in a blend of new and old that is satisfying for the most part. And today we are living in an era that is essentially a gold mine of gaming, where it seems that remaking these old classics is the way to go, as given the praises of remakes such as Link's Awakening on the Nintendo Switch, Metroid Zero Mission back on the GBA, Resident Evil 2, 3, and now 4, and of course Final Fantasy VII Remake with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth coming later this year. These games basically demonstrate that sometimes working on certain mechanics and giving them a fresh breath of air is rather rewarding, but it also makes us question if there actually is a point to even playing the original game for that matter, which, yeah, you're gonna have to hold on to that sentiment in the meantime. We're gonna explain it a little bit later, but you know, just hold on to it. I know that we live in an era in the video game industry where all the video games that we know and love back then are basically getting their remake treatment, from the Resident Evil games to, of course, Metal Gear Solid 3 that was teased, to Silent Hill 2, and of course Persona 3 Reloaded and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. You have to understand that there is also a merit of asking whether or not there is a problem with remakes in the first place. And I hope to find that answer. If not, well then, you know, it is what it is. The remake treatment certainly has its charms, make no mistake about that, and one thing that I enjoy about them is the ability to captivate the original feel but give it a more modern means. They add a level of unique charm and storytelling that wasn't available to them back when the original game released, and allows them to reimagine the game in its entirety, be it with new story direction and beats, new gameplay loops and controls, and voice acting to give the characters we know and love back then a new refreshing atmosphere without so much rebooting the franchise entirely. The first Resident Evil remake back on the GameCube in 2001 is no exception to this rule, because god damn, talk about a game that certainly has merits being re-released on modern console settings to this very day, given the revolutionary contributions it brought to remaking games. Now, Resident Evil Remake, or Remake is what I think people like to call it, is what we know to be a classic remake, both in its reception and in its formula. It's a new way to experience the original PS1 version with its hand controls, but the graphics and story is altered to add more to the Spencer Mansion experience, which results in currently one of the best Resident Evil games of all time, sitting there next to RE2 Classic, Remake, and Resident Evil 4 respectively. Speaking of Resident Evil remakes, Resident Evil 2 Remake and the current Resident Evil Remake trilogy is also something that deserves high merits for maintaining the original game's aspects while amplifying it with the controls of a third-person over-the-shoulder camera action. Now, these games, or at least RE2 Remake and RE4 Remake, are the best approaches to playing the game while still retaining the nostalgic feel of their original counterparts, and then get the job done in terms of maintaining what made the original game so exceptionally well received. And the same can even be said with Dead Space Remake, as that game added a lot of quality of life improvements from the original while sticking to its guns, literally, and retaining the original game's beats and patterns, which was a welcome in arms after the mediocre arrival of Callisto Protocol. Then of course you got the Final Fantasy VII franchise with two remakes front and center, one released back in April of 2020 by the name of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and one in 2024 called Final Fantasy Rebirth, both putting a new twist on the dynamic story that the original presented back in 1997. These games, plus a DLC side story Insurgents with Yuffie, present that new way of playing the original Final Fantasy VII, now with action RPG mechanics embedded, which is something that always worked best with Final Fantasy the more you look back, especially seeing how Final Fantasy XVI plays, oh lord. But back to Final Fantasy VII Remake, the game also allows a new direction in storytelling that enables old and new players to experience what could have been the story back in its PS1 days. Though spoilers, it does seem that the whole idea of Final Fantasy VII Remake is quite literally remaking the story of the original and changing the fates of those involved in the original canon, but I think I took a nap when that story plot point was being presented, so my bad. You also can't forget Live Alive or Live Alive? I don't really know, but this remake surely takes the underrated cake given the nature of its 2D HD graphics, something that thanks to Octopath Traveler back in 2017 and 2018, it has now shaped the idea of what an HD 2D game could look like, and this game is a clear demonstration of that. Plus, we're also supposed to get a remake of one of the Dragon Quest games with this very same engine, but who can really say for sure on that front? This is Square Enix after all, wouldn't be surprised to see what may not be the case. Hey everybody, this is future Brian Emanuel here. I'm making this quick edit here to the video to let you guys know that yes, I am very aware of the Super Mario RPG remake that announced itself back at the Nintendo Direct. It was just that during the script phase and the editing of this video, it was before that Nintendo Direct and then they announced it, but yes, I do want to briefly mention that that is also something in the works. That is also something that is going to be presented to us later this year. I'm absolutely all for it. I really enjoyed what the original presented. I know that it is something that is massively praised for everybody that grew up with the SNES, and I'm super excited to see how the Nintendo Switch version is going to line up with everything, plus what it could present in a modern context. Anyway, back to the video here. But throwing Square Enix aside from now, we can see that also Pokemon have done their fair share of good and not so great remakes too. Yeah, sorry Pokemon BDSP, you honestly deserved better. From Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green back on the GBA in 2004 to of course BDSP on the Nintendo Switch, these remakes for the most part provide a new refreshing take on the original games while keeping most of the original charm and quality. Again, for the most part. And with the spin-off front, we can't forget Mystery Dungeon DX as they brought back a GBA classic while adding new mechanics that weren't there previously, resulting in a much grander way of playing your favorite Pokemon side game. Oh, and we can't forget about the art style because that is an absolute delight to look at too. Alright, so quick intermission time ladies and gentlemen. The point so far in terms of remakes is that yes, a remake is trying to translate and transform the classic into something modern, refreshing, and unique in terms of gameplay style, story direction, and characterizations. But it's also important that while these are the main factors in terms of like making a remake the way that it is, you also have to understand that it comes at a cost, which is none other than the nostalgic factor, which, man, that is definitely one of the most excruciating costs out there in terms of the video game world. When remaking a video game, the nostalgic factor is a major key component which often elevates the remake's quality, but it can also hinder it greatly, which causes a major problem in presenting a remake in the first place. Most of the time, the developers themselves will be asking if this remake is actually worth it, mainly because of their ties with the original game and how much of a classic they tend to be. Sometimes when looking at a remake, the need to ask what makes this different compared to the original is indeed an important question to look at, and while visuals is one thing, the modern feel and gameplay dynamic is also equally important, which thankfully with some games this has been tackled well, such as Ratchet & Clank 2016, the Yakuza Kiwami duology, Metroid Samus Returns, and Shadow of the Colossus. Metroid Samus alone proves the point that sometimes modern recreations can help create a different experience that may seem different when compared to its original, but the beats and patterns that were once there adds for a uniquely distinctive experience while still adding new gameplay mechanics that previously weren't there. Plus, Metroid is underrated and just wanted to throw this segment to the video, so my bad everybody. By the way, Samus Aran is the GOAT. I won't elaborate any further. If you know, you know. That's it. Also, Tifa's pretty cool. I mean, like, look at her. Look how cool she is, you know? Like, it's Tifa. Tifa always wins. In fact, she's like the #1 in majority of like best female characters. I'm not even kidding. You can literally Google that right now. However, this nostalgia factor can sometimes blindside the new mechanics of an already great remake and often butt heads with the original for comparison's sake, or just to be an asshole online simply to say, but the original did this better here, which no, we shouldn't be doing that in the first place. Resident Evil 4 Remake is a perfect example of this nostalgia critiquing that many were close to bring down the qualities and praise of this remake simply because there was no Ashley Ballistics joke or how they almost ripped apart Ada Wong's performance and threatened the new voice actress in the remake because she wasn't Ada Wong. I'm not even kidding. Or how the Modern Warfare remakes have caused backlash and how the game rebooted itself while trying to maintain the original two games' experiences and reimagining the possibilities. Of course, granted, Call of Duty is a major franchise and it's not surprising that people still play it nowadays thanks to Warzone, but the single player campaigns surely weren't something many were keen on exploring after realizing how much they deviated from its original direction. And if you want to go a little bit further back, let's head on to the Nintendo DS days of old where the Super Mario 64 DS was introduced, where the game is solid and a great blast, but with a controls needed some tweaking due to the lack of analog controls or a C-stick for that matter, resulting in a clunky game that should have been made for the Nintendo GameCube in all honesty. And going back to Pokemon for a second here, the faithful remake approach can also be a step backwards as it can destroy the potential modern gaming experience that was never really presented. Much like BDSP is a faithful remake of the original Diamond and Pearl, it does suck to see that the nostalgia factor is kicked into high gear without much to do that's extra like back in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire or even Heart Gold Soul Silver had done in the past. Plus, it wouldn't have hurt to see them get the sword and shield treatment and asset design, but the past is in the past sadly. At least we got Legends Arceus, and a lot of people tend to consider that a remake as opposed to BDSP. Hell, we can also even discuss voice acting as part of the problem to go back to 801 for Resident Evil 4 Remake and how certain new voice actors can cause a not so pleasant experience in some cases. Sometimes remakes like to recast the entire original cast in favor of newer voice actors in the industry, which is great and all, but it can greatly affect the nostalgia factor in terms of representing the original characters and their personalities, and sometimes new voice talent can change the dynamic of the character in both good and bad ways. But that's not even scratching much at the surface here, as sometimes remakes can feel rather unnecessary, and going back to many remakes that have presented so far, it also makes the original game feel less valuable than before, especially when the game was already a great one from the start. Again, to go back to many AAA titles, the remake treatment can greatly affect the reputation of said great games and can cause a massive debate on whether or not it is necessary to play the original game. Again, Resident Evil 4 Remake and even The Last of Us Part 1 are perfectly good examples here. My second point here is that the nostalgic factor is a contributor and a massive deterrent when it comes down to making that classic remake experience. And oftentimes, we do tend to favor the classic in certain aspects, and because of that, we like to peg down the remake in terms of either their removal of it or their lack of emphasis regarding those mechanics and gameplay styles, which isn't a bad thing, but it can definitely escalate the situation if not handled properly. Trust me, I went through a Persona 3 Reload and it wasn't a fun time. And we also haven't even discussed the possibilities of remakes that are to be released in the near future, such as Metal Gear Solid 3 Remake, Persona 3 Reload, and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, where we hope to see them stick to the original script as best as they possibly could, while also enhancing the gameplay and controls from the original. At least in my case, I do hope to see Persona 3 Reload get this treatment, considering that the game is almost 16 years old, so it does need to take a few steps from Persona 5 in animation, controls, and gameplay mechanics, which thankfully based on the leaked footage and the trailer showcase back on that Xbox thing, we are seeing that while retaining the early 2000s atmosphere it had presented back then. As for Metal Gear Solid 3 Remake, well, hopefully a trailer can show us some gameplay, but that does sound rather interesting to see Snake back in action in a modern gaming setting, though it is always nice to have you back, Solid Snake, and here's to a successful mission when you arrive. All in all, the gaming industry is definitely changing thanks to the contributions of remakes and how they sort of translate the classic games into a modern setting, and it's pretty cool not to overlook this innovation because it also helps with future titles within a franchise and how they can implement what they learned in the remakes and apply them in those games, adding an even better level of satisfaction regarding what's to come. I mean, just to end things off right here, imagine if Sega decided to remake the original 3 Sonic games and make them into a modern 2D Sonic experience, or how Mario Sunshine can be remade to have Odyssey-like gameplay controls, to even perhaps bring back Mega Man Legends with an all new added features and gimmicks that can end up in a fabled Mega Man Legends 3, though this last part is just a wet dream of mine. Boy, those Legends need a revival though. At the end of the day, most remakes are just inherently good despite what the title of this video have to say about them, and it's a cool video game concept that I would definitely like to see more of in the future, while also ensuring that we get the ability to play the original for comparison's sake, which is another issue remakes tend to have in some cases, but that's probably for a two-parter video since I am running out of things to say here, TBH, and I think there are a lot more things I left out after editing this video and shipping it out for you guys to see and enjoy. But that's a wrap on remakes, and comment down below your thoughts as to whether or not there are problems with remakes, if there are something unique about them, and which one is your favorite remake as well, because remakes are cool, you know, like even though there are some problems with it and some factors that have to be taken into consideration, they're still going to be a fun time. I mean, we've seen that with Resident Evil, with Final Fantasy 7, and of course we're going to see that with future ones down the line. But hey, I want to see all your thoughts below. I hope you guys enjoyed this unique video essay, I guess, of sorts and all that kind of stuff. I hope to turn it into a series in the future, so let me know your thoughts if you want more of this with other ideas that I want to talk about and all that kind of stuff. But that's all in the comments. do what you gotta do here on YouTube. If you also want to further support the content, you also got Patreon as well, which, you know, I don't recommend as much, but if you really want to go that extra mile, it's definitely there. But again, do what you got to do here. I got a lot of stuff to work on. I got to head back to the classics, as they say. Even though I'm young, I'm not trying to be old here, but I got to work on all those projects that you guys have been asking for and waiting for as well. So stay tuned for all that. I'll catch you all with the next one. Love you as always to 120, and I'll see you all with that next one. But if we could remake Sonic Adventure 1 though,